Good morning. Welcome to morning meditation. Great to have you with us. Our lectionary drops us in on the book of Tobit today, but it starts in chapter 2. And Tobit, as a book, doesn't play so well when you leave out massive quantities of information. So realizing that they only have 1 week to shove it all in, they give us the highlights. Not maybe realize, but they give us only the highlights. But it does not give us fully the flavor of the book of Tobit. And so we'll try to pick up a little bit of the flavor of the book today. It's 14 chapters, so it's not a super long book. But they started us on chapter 2 today, and chapter 1 gives us the backdrop. It's an interesting piece because it's like a historical novel, sort of like what we see. This thing is set during the Civil War or something like that, or this thing was set during the American Revolution or World War II or something. This is set during the northern tribes' captivity in Assyria. And so, if you'll remember, it is the Assyrians that topple the northern part. After David and Solomon, the kingdom is split in half into the north and the south. Judah, or what we've come to know as Judea, was in the south, what came to be known as Israel. And the northern kingdom, Israel was the northern kingdom, and that gets destroyed by Assyria, and they are taken into captivity, and they become Samaritans in the New Testament. Anyway, fascinating on many levels. So we will pursue that today. We have Stacy with us, so great to have that, and so we will begin in song. So Tobit as a book is clearly written as a morality story. I mean, we are to glean ways of living and how we are to live. It's written in a time, okay, so it places it back in like the 7th century BC, but it's written in the 2nd century, pretty much agreed on that that's when it's written. And so it's not history like we would think about history, and none of the Bible is history like we would maybe think about history. History is to be written by a middle-of-the-road observer who's not taking sides, who just wants to relay the facts. Of course, we know that this is not ever truly possible because we all write from within our own mindset and system. We can't get out of it, and so we have biases, whether we want to or not. But that's the way we tend to think about it. The non-biased observer who's just giving us the facts is the way. This was not the conception as it was started out. The early histories in Greece and certainly what is done in the Bible are made to tell us, to teach us, to show us how we are to live, how we can come closer, how we can get through the storms that are coming before us now. If we look back to the past, the way they got through their difficulties, we can get through this difficulty too, through the advice of the ancients. And so this is, even as a historical novel, it's not written just to entertain, as much of our entertainment stuff is written today, written just to entertain. And if it has a moral component, well, it accidentally works its way in there. Once in a while. I mean, some authors have definite moral components, but others are just writing to entertain. This is not Tobit. Tobit has definite ideas of how we ought to live. Okay, and so the situation back in the 7th century, the northern kingdom is carried away into captivity, into Assyria, and kind of lose their faith there. That's why the Samaritans were looked down upon. They were brought back, but then they didn't have the purity of religion. And so whether or not they should have been looked down on, that's another question, but they were certainly looked down upon at the time of Jesus as not the greatest people in the world. So when Jesus has Samaritans do wonderful thing, this is to upbraid the locals and to encourage them to step it up in their holiness, in their following of God. So the situation that is happening in the 2nd century BC is similar. In that time, the Greeks under Alexander had conquered Palestine or Israel, current Israel, and had ruled it. And as often was, it kind of varied back and forth, but they were at first very tolerant of the local religions. And then this fellow Antiochus, who the book of Maccabees complains about, takes over. And he is not tolerant of the local religions. And so this is where you get pigs offered in the temple, and the temple needs to be rededicated. And so that's the book of Maccabees. And so it's not exactly known when it was written, but this is probably the milieu with which it's written, that people are in danger of losing the faith of their forebears. They're in danger of losing that faith, of just molding into a Greek system of religion. And so probably Tobit is written to encourage people in that. All right, this is a long preamble. Sorry about that, but let's get into the book, into the introduction. The first chapter, which is not given us before the 2nd chapter, or maybe it was. Oh, I skipped Monday. For sure it was given to us yesterday. Okay, my apologies. But we didn't get it because we read the Visitation. So, under a normal year, we would get this, chapter 1. But we'll give this to you because we didn't get it yesterday because we had the Feast of the Visitation and Memorial Day. This book tells the story of Tobit, son of Tobiel, son of Hananiel, son of Aduel, son of Gabiel, son of Raphael, son of Raguel, of the family of Asiel, and the tribe of Naphtali. If you don't like my pronunciations, Prove me wrong. There we are. During the days of Shalmaneser, king of the Assyrians, he was taken captive. So this is Tobit, was taken captives. And he was in Naphtali in the upper Galilee, above and to the west of Asher, and north of Fogar. Okay. I, Tobit, have walked all the days of my life on paths of fidelity and righteousness. I performed many charitable deeds for my kindred and my people who had been taken captive with me to Nineveh, and that is to Assyria. And so they get, and if you'll remember this, Jonah, one of those other stories, has people going to Nineveh to get them to convert. And so Nineveh this isn't the first time that Jewish literature, well after the fact, have used Nineveh as kind of that city of not so good. When I lived as a young man in my own country, in the land of Israel, the entire tribe of my ancestor Naphtali broke away from the house of David, my ancestor, and from Jerusalem. And so he's claiming both the northern kingdom and Judea as his ancestries. The city that had been singled out of all Israel's tribe, that all Israel might offer sacrifice there. It was the place where the temple, God's dwelling, had been built and consecrated for all generations to come. And of course, at the time of its writing, it's in its second temple. At the time of its placing the story, it's in its first temple, where the temple is still totally awesome. The second temple wasn't as totally awesome. All my kindred, as well as the house of Naphtali, my ancestor, used to offer sacrifice on every hilltop in Galilee to the calf that Jeroboam, king of Israel, had made in Dan. And so Dan's the very northern part. And the north and south split. The north started to go their own way. But I alone used to go often to Jerusalem for the festivals, as was prescribed for all Israel by long-standing decree. And so this, of course, is the books of Moses prescribed that we go. Deuteronomy. What's the E one?
Exodus.
Yeah, Exodus. Oh, thank you. Deuteronomy, Exodus, and Leviticus are the long-standing. Bringing with me first fruits of the crop, the firstlings of the flock, the tithes of the livestock, and the first shearings of the sheep. I used to hasten to Jerusalem and present them to the priests, Aaron's son, at the altar. And so it's clear he's building the case for this worship in Jerusalem at the temple, that this is worthy of fighting for, this is worthy of defending, as the Maccabees will do shortly, probably shortly after this is written. To the Levites, I used to give the tithe of grain, wine, olive oil, pomegranates, figs, and other fruits. 6 years in a row, I used to give a second tithe in money, which each year I would go to Jerusalem to pay. The third year tithe I gave to orphans, widows, and converts who had joined the Israelites. Every third year I would bring them this offering, and we ate in it, keeping with the decree laid down in the Mosaic law concerning it, and according to the commands of Deborah, the mother of my father Tobiel, for my father had died and left me an orphan. When I reached manhood, I married Anna, a woman of our ancestral family. By her I had a son whom I named Tobiah. Now after I had been deported to the Assyrians and came as a captive to Nineveh, all my kindred and my people used to eat the food of the Gentiles. Read here, the Greeks, at the time that this is actually written. But I refrained from eating that Gentile food because I was mindful of God with all my heart. The Most High granted me favor and status with Shalmaneser, so that I became a purchasing agent for all his needs. Until he died, I would go to Media, buy goods for him, and also deposit pouches of silver worth 10 talents in trust with my kinsman Gabael, son of Gabri, who lived in Rages in the land of Media. When Shalmaneser died and his son Sennacherib came to the rule in his stead, the roads to Media became unsafe, so I could no longer go to Media. In the days of Shalmaneser, I had performed many charitable deeds for my kindred, members of my people. I would give my bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked. If I saw one of my people who had died and been thrown behind the wall of Nineveh, I used to bury him. So if you'll remember this, right, the 7, what are these things called? Bury the dead. 7 corporal works of mercy. And so 6 of them are taken out of the Beatitudes. And the 7th, though, is the bury dead. It's taken here out of Tobit. And it's in other places, but it is most fully written about here. Sennacherib returned from Judea, having fled during the days of the judgment enacted against him by the king of heaven, because of the blasphemies he had uttered, whom he had killed, I buried. For in his rage he killed many Israelites. But I used to take their bodies away by stealth and bury them. So when Sennacherib looked for them, he could not find them. But a certain Ninevite went and informed the king about me, that I was burying them, and I went into hiding. When I realized that the king knew about me, and that I was being hunted to be put to death, I became afraid and took flight. All my property was confiscated. I was left with nothing. All that I had was taken to the king's palace, except for my wife Anna and my son Tobiah. But 40 days did not pass before 2 of the king's sons assassinated him and fled to the mountain of Ararat. A son of his, Esarhaddon, succeeded him as king. He put up Ahikar, my kinsman, Aniel's son, in charge of credit accounts of his kingdom. He took control over the entire administration. Then Ahikar interceded on my behalf, and I returned to Nineveh. Ahikar had been chief cupbearer, keeper of the signet ring, treasury accountant, and credit accountant under Sennacherib, king of the Assyrians, and Esarhaddon appointed him as second to himself. He was, in fact, my nephew, of my father's house, and of my own family. All right, that is the long introduction to where we get to today. And then, of course, he gets blinded today in the reading, and then he berates his wife for what wasn't her fault. Great. Not good. Great stuff, though. It's just really interesting story, the way it all blends together. And so many pieces of faith and piety are brought into it, and angels are brought into it. So if you get your chance, bring out your Bible. Like I said, Tobit is only 14 chapters. It is not a huge read, but a super interesting one, as this is a picture of what a 2nd century BC Jewish person used to inspire his people of the day, going back to the 7th century BC and the hated place of Nineveh. All right. Boom, boom, boom. Right. All right. So worthy of reading, and the setup is there. And of course, this will unfold too in our daily readings. But as we read the daily readings, they give us something, but they leave out other super interesting details. So it's worthy of tackling as a piece of literature. All right, thank you for joining us today for morning meditation. We do this Tuesdays through Fridays at 9 o'clock. Stacy, take us away in song.